Joining me in this episode of Working Forward is Gianna Driver. She's been the Chief People Officer at Lattice and now is currently an advisor there as well. And she's going to share with us many years of experience scaling global people and talent functions in high-growth environments. Enjoy this episode. You're listening to Working Forward, a future of work-focused podcast from People Forward Network. These episodes pave the road ahead, helping us confidently step into the future as a leader who moves people forward. After all, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Let's go. All right, Gianna, it's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us on Working Forward. How are you doing?
Thanks, Jason. I'm doing well and really excited to be here and dive into our conversation today.
Yeah, I am too. I don't know if you've heard or not, but there's a lot of changes going on in the world of work right now. Can you believe that?
I know, just one or two, a couple things, I know.
Just one or two. That's right. Well, your experiences as being a strategic HR leader, and I know you've been doing a lot of work with Lattice around that. We really want to tap into your genius today to help a lot of our listeners understand what's going on right now, but then also start thinking about what's probably coming down the pike here later on in 2025, heading into 2026.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, let's start off with this question. With everything that's going on, what are you seeing are the biggest issues that strategic HR leaders are facing right now?
Ooh, Jason, this is a great
question.
It's
a big one.
I was just going to say, that's a great question.
Let's see where this goes.
Yeah, well, it's such a beefy topic. You know, right now, HR leaders are tasked with overseeing the well-being of employees. And we do that in partnership with other leaders in an organization. And honestly, we are living in such a polarized world, especially here in the U.S. right now. We as HR professionals are thinking about how do we maintain an engaged workforce, a highly productive workforce, a workforce that feels connected to the mission of whatever we're doing. Oh, and by the way, we've got rapidly changing technology with AI this and AI that. We've got many generations working all together in the workforce. We've got, organizations figuring out, are we going to remain hybrid? Are we going to do remote first? Are we going to go back into, in-office mandates? There's a whole rigmarole around DEI and diversity conversations right now. So all of this is happening, and we need to make sure that we're maintaining a productive work environment where people can focus and get stuff done in a healthy way. So just a couple things going on, Jason.
Just a few things. That I want to share a conversation I had with my dad recently. Just last week, actually. My dad's 85. He's in assisted living. So he's retired. He's not working anymore, but he's always fascinating. He listens to the show because he likes to think about and see where things are headed. And he asked me last week, he goes, how do you do work-life integration? You have 4 sons, you work from home. And my dad never worked from home, right? He had one of the traditional jobs. He was kind of like a mid-level manager supervisor for Pepsi Cola. So he went into an office. He would usually leave by 6 or 7 in the morning, and he was usually home by like around 5 o'clock in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
But then he was done. And all of his attention was with me. We'd go out and we'd play basketball and stuff like that. But there was a very clear black and white, I'm gone, I'm off to work, and then I'm back home. And in our conversation, it was really interesting because in his schema, he was like, that made things really easy for him. He was like, for me as a dad, I felt like it was crystal clear. I go to work, I get my work done. And then I come home, I don't have Slack hitting me up. I don't have these, I'm not walking into a whole bunch of emails the next morning that came in overnight from people kind of thing. And what he was communicating with me, he was like, I know you've been working from home for quite a while remote, and you kind of work like all the time, but then there's like time in between where like you're able to go do stuff with the kids during the day and stuff. But he's like, I know you work at night too, when you're catching up on emails and Slack messages. He's like, how do you do that? And I hadn't thought about that before, Gianna, because that's just life as I've known it since around COVID time is when I kind of moved away from like working primarily in schools to then working with businesses to doing consulting and now with the People Forward Network and being able to work from home is I love that and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But having that conversation with my dad also made me wonder sometimes, is that a struggle for people sometimes of figuring out that balance or that integration of work and life since you're working more from home?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever wonder about that?
I do wonder about that. And my observation is, and you said it just a second ago, there's work-life balance and there's work-life integration. And I think of this more as work-life integration, where there's not a formulaic approach that says this is how you do work-life integration, balance, work from home, remote, hybrid, whatever. I think the world in which we live now is one where we have more autonomy than we've had before, right? In your dad's era, frankly, my mom's 81 and her era as well, she went to work, then, she came home and then she had family time, and then I did homework and then, went to bed, and then the whole thing started the next day. Well, the blessing and the curse of the world today is with technology, many of us are able to pick and choose what works best for us. And we've got more flexibility to pick the kids up from school and take them to the dentist appointments if we need to, or to go for a run in the middle of the day, or pick up dry cleaning. And we can sort of weave life into work and work into life. And I think that was not impossible, but harder back in the before times. I also think the world in which we live now is a lot more dynamic. We're able to pick and choose the things that we gravitate toward. We're able to pick and choose the media that we consume and how we are showing up in the world with all of these different forces and pieces of information. But it is hard, and it's an adjustment because it's not something that I think you and I were necessarily taught how to do by our parents, which is why the older generations, I think, struggle with understanding, wait, you're working, but you're sitting at home. Like, my mom still doesn't fully understand how I'm working, but I haven't left the house. She's like, wait, what?
That's so true. As you mentioned that, Gianna, looking back, growing up, I knew zero people who work from home.
Right. Yeah.
Literally none.
Yeah.
Like everyone, if you had a job, if you're working full time,
yeah,
you left to go do work and then came back home. But to your point, and it was a good reminder for me, is I love working out. And I'm so grateful now, since I've been able to do life work integration, that I can go work out during the day. I'll block it in my schedule, because with young kids, my mornings are all about getting them out the door, getting them to school. I'm too exhausted by the evening to go do it. But being able to take those breaks during the day to go exercise and work out. And my dad, he didn't get to do those things. You went to work, you put in your 8 to 10 hours, and then he came home. And so he didn't really work out, and neither did my mom. And I think probably a function to a certain degree of part of that was you didn't have the flexibility during the day to do those things.
Exactly. And today, with all of our technology, we're able to have our watches tell us, oh, it's time to stand. Oh, like, go get your daily activity goal, your steps goal, your whatever. So we're living in a world where there's more information. That said, we are still fundamentally human beings. And so we were humans 80 years ago. We are humans today. And frankly, my hope is that we're still going to be human in 80 years from now. And so making sense of all of this information coming at us at once, I think, is part of what's overwhelming and challenging, and also the beauty of this era.
You used the word there, hope. Let's have a conversation around hope, because some fascinating stuff just came out a few weeks ago from Gallup on hope. In our PFN community, we had someone, Dr. Aaron Tobacco from UCSF University.
Oh, yeah, just down the road from me.
Oh, cool. We're gonna have to get the two of you connected.
Yeah.
So that's a different conversation. I'll make a note of that. We'll make sure that you and Aaron get connected.
Cool.
But Aaron shared this data. It was just last month in February from Gallup. And all these years, the number one trait that most people, around 70-some%, typically said they look for in leadership is trust.
Mm-hmm.
That changed this year. What do you think the number one thing is they're looking for? Trust became number 2.
Ooh.
You mentioned it.
Integration, work-life integration, flexibility, belonging.
Close. It's a 4-letter word, but it's a good one. It's not a bad one that's going to get us the explicit rating on the podcast.
It's not love.
Not love, but it's close. Hope.
Hope.
Hope has risen to number 1. And what I'd like to ask you is around that. So if we've moved to a point where yes, trust is still important, but now it's 23% less important than hope,
Yeah.
a lot of things have changed in a short period of time for hope to become number one.
Hmm.
People are just looking for hope right now from their leaders, even more so than trust. Let that sink in, leaders, as you listen to this episode. Who would have ever thought that something would supersede trust as being the most important in the workplace? But hope is.
Do you think that's because many people today are not necessarily getting their cup of hope filled in the non-working world? And so therefore in the working world, they're wanting hope and some groundedness because it can be very destabilizing when you look around the world right now and the polarization and just the lack of communication and unity between people who have very strong opinions and beliefs. So do you think that the lack of hope in other parts of our world makes us seek that and want and need that even more than before in the workplace?
I would think so. We are what we consume, right? And I'm going to raise my hand here and say I'm on Twitter/X way more than I should be. I never post anything, but that's where I often go. Here's the nerd in me. I love fantasy sports like fantasy football and stuff. That's where I go for my fantasy football information. But here's what's happened, Gianna. I hop in X looking for my fantasy football information, and I am constantly bombarded in my feed with negative this, negative that, shouting match, just vitriol, right, from every which direction. And that's why ultimately I gave up Facebook about 7 or 8 years ago. I have an account so that someone else can't create an account of me. But I don't use Facebook anymore for that reason either.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes me wonder, have we done a poor job, a disservice for everyone, that we're so quick to amplify negativity, but we don't amplify positivity? To be honest, I've always wondered why we don't watch the news in our house because we have young kids under 11. And the reason we don't watch the news is 95% of it is murder, people arguing with each other. And I know that's maybe that's being a little bit too like unicorns and rainbow kind of thinking on my side. I don't know, but I'd like to think the optimist in me is like, why can't we accentuate and amplify the positive, the things that most of us can't agree on, and have good conversations around those things and make progress on them? But back to your original point, I'm kind of getting off tangent here.
Yeah.
I do think it is. I think most of us, if we're on social media, let's be honest, the majority of the information we're going to get on social media, it's negative. It's not uplifting. It's not praising each other. It's not talking about wonderful advancements or these incredible, awesome achievements that are helping people. It's mostly just a lot of bickering and hate and vitriol that ends up getting spewed.
And this is
And
where I
it's
go
hard to
back.
stay positive and hopeful if you're constantly bombarded by
If
that.
if that is the media you consume, I agree. I go back to some fundamental core beliefs that I have that, frankly and wonderfully, I think many other people have as well. Number one, I firmly believe there is more that unites us than divides us. And I think focusing first and foremost on those basic core things that unite us starts to create a foundation of empathy and understanding so that we can put the guardedness and the armor down and start to engage in conversation. And when we're able to engage in conversation, we're able to think expansively and creatively and come up with new solutions to problems. The problems could be in the workplace. They could be coming up with new patents and inventions or new tech solutions for things. It could be solving world problems. I mean, the applications, I think, are endless, but it starts from a place of connection, a place of trust, a place of hope. And I agree with you. I think that focusing intentionally on more positive spins on things, whether it's the media we consume or, the whatever, I think that's really important because our brains are essentially big computers. Data in has a lot to do with the output and the quality of what we get out of our brain computers. And similar to you, I had noticed several years ago, pre-pandemic, that much of the media was bad news and really hyperbolic, right? Like it's like bad news is what kind of made the news. And I checked in with myself and said, "Well, I don't feel good after consuming this." And so I started to seek out positive news outlets. Like CNN has a positive, news recap that they send out. And so, like, I've got little things like that. And also, in a lot of social media, you can click and say you want to see less of, this type of content or more of this other type of content. And I think the algorithms are getting better at making sure we get the kind of content that we're looking for.
Definitely. They still got a lot of work to do. But if we're making a little bit of progress, that's good. The other thing I'm doing to try and help with some of this is setting intentions in the morning, like making sure I'm hitting gratitude first. Like I got to start my day with gratitude. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I woke up today. That's the first thing to be grateful for.
Yeah.
Regardless of any challenges ahead, I'm going to be grateful for that. And so I found those little practices start my day that way.
Yeah.
That's a much better way than me hopping immediately on my phone
Yeah.
and getting into the chaos of social media.
I
The other
think
thing
it's
too around hope. Oh, go ahead, Gianna.
I was gonna say, I think it's because those little practices that you're talking about, these small acts, start to slowly rewire the neural connections in our brain. And when we rewire our brain, then it becomes unconscious for us to see the good in things and in activities and people and to be positive and to be more hopeful.
And there's science to back that up. What is the ratio? I'm going to butcher the ratio, but there's been research on people's thoughts inside their head, the percentage of positive to negative. And I can't remember the exact research study or what the number was, but it was something like around 3 to 4 negative thoughts for every one positive thought.
Hmm.
That's just who we are as a species. So we have to put in the extra work to stay positive, because kind of like our default mode is that our brain naturally is attracted to catastrophe or thinking the worst in situations sometimes.
You know
And
why
we've got
that
to
is?
rewire it, like you said. The other thing I think that's going on with hope, I don't know if they found this in the study,
Yeah.
but I do think people are worried about AI job displacement. I think that's part of the reason why all of a sudden hope's never been number one. It's always been trust. I think within a year, that's why it went from trust to hope this time, is because of all of the stuff people are hearing about AI job displacement. What do you think about that? Do you agree?
I agree with you. And let's put a pin in that. We're going to come back to it. But what I wanted to say, just to help us understand why we as humans sometimes grab on to catastrophe and the fear of job displacement or whatever, that's a survival mechanism, right? Like we as humans, as we were evolving, it was nice to know the good things, but we had to be myopically focused on the dangerous, negative
Mm.
things because that ensured our survival. So this is something that is hardwired in us. And so I encourage listeners to not feel guilty about the hard wiring that we have in our brains, but to accept it, understand it, and then to intentionally, consciously override some of that hard wiring because it's very possible to override that. Now, to your question of AI and the fear that can surround AI because people are afraid of job displacement. This is where I would say acknowledge, yes, this is delicate territory for me, and I'm feeling really vulnerable, and that this bot, this automation, this whatever could replace me, and also understand that lack of action will ensure that you are replaced by that which you fear. A healthier way to engage with the fear is to acknowledge its existence and to say, let me see what I can do about that so that I am working with AI and automation and all of these different tools, and I'm leveraging them to help me become more effective and better at what I do. And I think if we're able to engage in that way, I don't think that AI will replace us. AI will morph the jobs that exist and how we are engaging and working with one another. AI is going to allow us to consume and digest and analyze vast quantities of data in ways that the human brain is unable to do on its own. So it is going to fundamentally shift the way that work is done. However, that said, I don't think it is going to replace and displace workers. I think it's going to require that we shift and evolve.
I agree with that perspective. I will admit, probably about 6 months to a year ago, I had more of the mindset of, oh boy, we can't compete with AI.
Hmm.
And I don't think we can on certain things. But here's where my mindset has come back around with what you just said, that I think is a very accurate prediction for where this is going to head. And that is, if you think about this from a global perspective, as a species, we don't do well if we aren't putting ourselves into purpose or meaningful like work, right? There's a reason globally, not just in the United States, but literally everywhere in the world, that if you have high unemployment, you have higher crime. Idle hands are not necessarily a good thing. As a species, it's important for us to be tied to purpose, to be tied to meaningful work. And if we think about that at the highest level, when we think about our economies around the entire world, if all of a sudden we were just to be like, oh, we're just going to flip a switch and we're just going to, eliminate 70, 80% of our workforce and we're just going to do 80, the majority of that's going to be done by AI itself. The ramifications for what it means in our whole world, not just for the company, are huge. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants rampant unemployment, increase in crime, increase in poverty. Those are things that are not good. And that's why I think all of us have a vested interest in making sure, and including our leaders, that we move into a future of just because AI can do something doesn't mean that it should be given that job or that specific task, that there are certain things that we should maintain as things that are driven and done by humans.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that there will be a big shakeup in terms of, are there going to be certain types of jobs that go away? Sure. Just like we no longer have elevator operators or telephone operators, right? Those things will evolve. But I do think that fundamental fear of like, well, none of us are going to be working, I can't see that ever becoming a reality because of the things we just were discussing. And that is, it's not good for the world. We need to be working. We need to be tied to a cause, doing meaningful work of some kind. I think it's just going to end up being a big metamorphosis for a lot of us in terms of the type of work that we're doing.
I agree. And what I would add to that, if we think about this through the lens of leadership in organizations, we are tasked with trying to figure out how we create workplaces and environments that are future ready and human centered. How do we do that? And being very action oriented, I think one of the ways that we can do that is, as leaders, make it safe and okay for our employees to start experimenting with using AI in small ways at their jobs. Providing employees with some guidelines around, here are the different tools that we have, here are acceptable uses of AI and the technology, and here are also some things that are outside of the boundaries for what we deem as acceptable for our organization. Because when we're able to welcome and destigmatize AI and have it be something that people can interact with and learn about, and learn with each other about, then it starts to become more of AI being integrated into our lives as opposed to competing with us. Because one of the things that I've picked up on in my observations of just humanity right now in our AI journey and evolution is sometimes there's this tendency to view AI as us versus them, AI versus human. And I don't know that I agree with that framing. I think a healthier framework is us and them, human and AI, humans leveraging AI, remaining in the driver's seat. I still believe that humans need to be very intentional about making the judgment calls and the final calls. As an example, when it comes to providing a raise for someone, a promotion and or a raise for an employee, I think that AI can help us gather lots of data and information on someone's promotion readiness and or what someone where someone is in terms of compensation, right? So relative to market data, relative to internal peers, all of that. And AI can even synthesize this, provide bullet points, and maybe even make a final recommendation. So that's the AI recommendation. I don't believe that AI should blindly be able to say person A gets this amount of raise, and yes, they get a promotion. Person B, no raise, like I don't think that that is an acceptable use of AI. But using AI to give us that information so that leaders can then look at this, apply their own skills, judgment, concepts, is important, because AI is not yet to the place where it can deduce fully how. AI can help us understand what, but I go back to what is equally important to how. AI can provide a lot of the information to let us know if what someone is doing is working and effective, but if how they are doing it is ineffective and there's a trail of brokenness around them, then that's where the human intervention can come into play and say, hold on a second, let's put this person on a development plan and work on, 1, 2, and 3. So it's about leveraging, integrating, and working with AI as opposed to, a versus or against AI, in my opinion.
There's data to back that up. Did you see the latest study from Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon on the effects of using AI on people's critical thinking?
No, what was it?
Just came out a few weeks ago, and it's kind of interesting. Folks that are overusing AI, so folks that use AI quite a bit, already we're seeing self-reported drops in critical thinking skills. This was a study done by Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon, just the last few weeks that came out.
Wow.
And so to your point, we need to maintain the critical critical thinking component still. That doesn't mean, like, you can still lean into AI to get its perspective on things, but at the end of the day, when it comes time to make the decision, don't leave that up to AI and be like, well, this is what AI said to do. This is what we're going to do. Use your brilliant brain to think about the humans that this affects. You've got to do that. That's so critically important. And that study reminded me of that if we're starting to see a decrease in our critical thinking skills, because as soon as we've got a task, it's like, I don't need to think about this. Let me just put a prompt in ChatGPT, let it spit something out for me. That's good enough. Let me ship that kind of thing. We're atrophying our brains to a certain extent, right? It's like we're no longer exercising those critical thinking skills. We're just like, let me put in a prompt. That's a good enough answer. Let's roll with that kind of thing.
And this is
And
where I
so it's a
think
good reminder that we
this
need to
is
maintain those critical thinking pieces.
I agree. And I think there's an opportunity for organizations to craft learning and development, training, talent development programs that are specifically geared toward critical thinking skills, because you're right. It's important that this doesn't become a lost art as we start to embrace AI. Because I do believe down the road, what we're going to see is those who are able to truly think critically and strategically and know the right questions to ask, those are going to be the people driving the future. Those are going to be the leaders and the people who are successful. And I think as folks in organizations, creating programs that teach people how to engage with AI and to think critically, and to problem solve and to use the data but not be dependent upon AI, I think is what's going to help us build teams that are the stellar teams that are going to help us win.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, we have to figure out the human AI dynamic part, to your point. And the other piece of it that's really interesting, so we have to be cognizant of making sure that we have learning and development. So if we are using AI more, that we're still working on those skills, exercising those muscles, because we still need them as human beings, not only at work, but we need them at home whenever we're with our friends and our family, of how to solve problems critically. But the other piece too that I want to get into this conversation with you about is the other side of AI that we have data on so far. There's a lot of talk out there about increased productivity and efficiency with AI. The data are showing the opposite, interestingly enough. And here's what I mean by that. And I'll find the study. I've got it listed in here in my notes somewhere. But right now, what we are finding is that with the use of AI, people actually are creating more work for themselves. Here's what's happening. The pace of things coming at us is faster. We start using AI. We're coming up with answers and things to those faster. So then the next thing is just coming at us faster and faster and faster. And it's a domino effect. Because if you're a team member who's not using AI, you've got a team member who is, and then you're kind of in, so quote unquote, like the assembly line, the next person on that project, and it's coming to you, you're like, whoa, like this person's sending me so much stuff so quick. Like, how do I keep up with this?
Mm-hmm.
That we're already starting to see that, yes, more stuff might be getting done, but that doesn't mean that there's less stuff coming at you. It just means that the next stuff is coming at you faster and more furiously. In other words, it's creating a much faster pace. So instead of being on the treadmill, jogging at like 5 miles per hour, now we're up at 8 miles per hour kind of thing. Any thoughts or reactions to that?
Yeah, well, I had two thoughts all at once as you were talking. The first one is, I think it's going to become very important for us to be comfortable with forcing a pause, because amidst so much movement, fast pace, AI, this, that, and the other, that's great and wonderful. However, let's remain in the driver's seat. What that looks like sometimes is taking control and saying, I'm going to call a pause for a moment. I need a few minutes to synthesize and process and just to reflect. Making time for reflection is a human process that is very, very important to creativity, to synthesizing, to integration, to learning. And so I would encourage folks to be comfortable saying, let me just press a quick pause here. It doesn't need to be like a 3-week pause, but let's just, like let me pause for a second and let that marinate for a little bit. That's kind of the first thing. The other thing that struck me as you were talking is, I had a mentor many, many years ago tell me, Gianna, you can have 2 out of these 3 things, but it's very hard to get 3 out of 3 things. And he said speed, quality, and cost. He's like, you can almost always get 2 out of those 3. But it's very hard to get 3 out of 3 all the time. And I think what you're saying is, in this world where there's speed and like, let's go. And, there's some cost efficiencies to be gained with AI and whatever. We want to make sure that we're not sacrificing quality just because, like things are moving so quickly. Right. And so this is where being cognizant of that sort of those 3 dots and intentionally saying, okay, let me try to slow things down a little bit. That way I can get the most optimal outcome with, yes, let's be efficient and move at a really good clip, and also not sacrifice quality, and also make sure that we're doing this in a cost-effective way because we're, a business.
That's right. We want all 3 though, don't we?
We're
do. Like, can't we just have a world where we get all 3? But and I love that you said in the driver's seat, by the way. I love that, with your last name being Driver. Has anyone told you that should be your podcast name, In the Driver's Seat? Right?
That might be something in the works, Jason. We'll see.
We'll see about that. Absolutely. But that forced pause that you just said.
Yeah.
If there's probably one big takeaway, at least from this episode for all leaders, think about forced pauses, because a lot of your people, especially your ones that are the hardest workers, they're probably not taking those forced pauses.
Yeah.
Because when we think about it, let's take a step back. The calendar as we know it is based off of the old ways of working, right? That you get the weekend, right? But the way we work now, if we know, we already have data early on here that's showing we are getting a lot more done, but we're having to go at a faster pace, and the next thing's coming at us even faster because of that, because we're getting more work done. We have to have those forced pauses, because the old calendar isn't going to be sufficient rest. We will burn ourselves out as a species doing that. And the news alert for all of us is, we can't keep up with AI. It doesn't need to eat or sleep. It doesn't have kids. It doesn't have these competing demands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. I love that tactic of like, think about forced pauses. There's a lot of companies that tout unlimited PTO, paid time off. But I'm curious, like, how many folks actually get to do that, where it's like, you know what? I'm going to go take a couple weeks off.
Yeah.
And feel good about it. That's tough.
So out here, especially in Silicon Valley, there are a lot of tech companies that have the unlimited, PTO policies and vacation policies and stuff. And back in the early 2000s, when this was all the rage and many companies were doing it, there was this fear that our employees are going to take, 10 weeks off per year, and how are we ever going to be productive, and et cetera, et cetera. And what companies found in general, these are general trends, right? Like there are, of course, outliers, but what companies found in general is the average vacation utilization in the companies that had the unlimited PTO policies was much lower than when they had the accrued policies. And so, what some of the most innovative companies did out here, the tech companies and in Silicon Valley, is they said, we're actually going to do a forced pause. We're going to do a forced PTO. While we have, yes, unlimited, PTO, we're going to strongly encourage all of our employees to take at least 10 days or 2 weeks off per year. And I like that approach, right? I like that approach of making it safe for people to take time off, to reflect, to recharge, to regenerate a little bit. Because when we create an environment where people can do that, they come back so much more productive, energized, creative, than, someone who's burnt out and barely able to string two sentences together because they're so tired.
That's so true. One of the things aspirationally at People Forward Network, we're really striving toward, we are currently, and we don't count hours, but we do have like typical days of the week we work Monday through Friday, right? We're at the point where we do kind of like a 4.5 day work week where we tell everyone on the team, take a half day off. If you want it to be like Monday sometime, it can. I think most everybody chooses Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to kind of be done around lunchtime-ish and
Yeah.
ease into the weekend. Aspirationally, we're hoping to get to that full 4 day work week. Monday through Thursday, Fridays are off for everybody. And part of the reason for that, going back to what we kicked off the episode with that you're talking about, is well-being of people. If we know just because we're leaning into AI more to get work done, but that means more work is going to come down the pipeline quicker and faster because we can get more done, we have to have those forced pauses, as you put it. And for us, aspirationally, if we can make sure we've got our systems, our processes, our routines down, where we can give an extra day every single week, that's an extra 52 days a year of rest and recuperation, and that everybody on the team's getting at the same time, where you aren't thinking like, oh gosh, when I come back in on Monday, I'm going to have like 18 Slack messages that Jason sent on Friday. But know that like everyone, you're off on Friday and you come back in on Monday refreshed. That seems like a future of work when we think about schedules and we think about productivity that we've got to be thinking strategically about, because already the data, again, show the more we're leaning into using AI, it's not decreasing the amount of work we're doing, it's increasing the amount, because the next thing we have to get to. And we have to have smart approaches around this to balance that out.
Mm-hmm. In Europe, some of the companies and places where they have instituted 4 day work weeks as opposed to 5 have shown increased levels of employee engagement. Sentiment analysis is that everyone is feeling better. And so, I have some friends who have worked in companies that have transitioned from 5 days to 4 day, work weeks. To be clear, it's not just the flip of a switch and it's done. It takes a lot of, intention. There's a whole process behind that. But it does seem to yield workplaces that are happier and more creative and productive and engaged. So I agree with you that creating space for intentional moments of pause and reflection is important, and we see all of the metrics shoot up. And I also like the idea of having it be something company wide, right? Because, everyone has come back from vacation and you're tan, you're well rested, and you're just like, okay, the Monday morning comes around post vacation and you open your inbox and you're just like, oh my goodness, what is going on? And after you get to the bottom of your inbox, you need another vacation.
That's right. You're like, why did I go?
Right. But if everyone is taking that Friday off and you've got the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, well, how beautiful that, you as a company are then coming back all refreshed, Monday and ready to rock and roll.
We need more rest. We need more rest, don't we?
We do. We do. Maybe AI can help us with that.
Right. That'd be great.
I just
Hey, if we
broke
can get to the digital twins being able to just take care of everything for us, right? And be like, hey, go to this meeting for me. I'm going to take a siesta in my office for an hour and then I'll be back online.
right,
But just
right.
recap for me everything that happened in the meeting and I'll get to it. We laugh at that, but I think there probably are people actually already doing that. I did meet someone who has a digital twin, and sometimes he has it on the meeting with him, but he's also on the meeting. But he may be like doing other stuff in the background, but his avatar, it looks exactly like him, and is looking and paying attention with natural motions. But behind the avatar, he's like answering emails, getting other stuff done. And it's kind of like, huh, that's interesting. I could see that being both a good thing and a challenging thing at times. Like there may be things where you really do need to be present in the moment with the people. But I guess maybe that begs the question of if it's one of those type of meetings, maybe you don't need to be there at all. And you could just send the avatar.
Yeah. Well, if you have a digital twin and they're in a meeting, and maybe you're in the meeting, or maybe you're in the meeting and not paying attention, or maybe you're not in the meeting, the knowledge transfer from your digital twin to you, I think, is tricky. Um, Also, humans are relational. We are social creatures, and we thrive on connectivity and relationship and community. That is what we get when we are present with others and we're engaging. I have no issue with AI sitting in on meetings and maybe taking notes and transcribing or things like that. However, having AI replace my presence entirely in a meeting doesn't feel comfortable for me, and I don't think we're there yet. Now, will we ever get there? Maybe. I'm not going to say, never, that at least where we are today with the technology and with where we are in general, I am not comfortable with AI replacing me in meetings and then telling me what to do afterward. That just feels not quite there. Not sure I'll ever get there, but not yet.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I haven't even taken the step of doing the note taker.
Oh, okay. That I've done that, and that I do like. I don't
And
do it
I
in every
and I
meeting.
probably should, but again, it's one of those things. I see that Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon. I'm like, the more stuff maybe I'm offloading to AI, I don't want my brain to atrophy. I don't want to give that away. I
Yeah.
want to have to make sure that I'm focused, I'm sharp, I'm in the meeting, I know what my to-dos are. I don't want to have to rely on something else to tell me all that stuff. But who knows? I may
Yeah.
change that
Yeah.
before too long. But I'm
Yeah.
but I'm still trying to hold on to that piece for me, just
Yeah.
personally of what I do.
Yeah. I was averse to having AI sit in my meetings, especially like the nature of HR is, I mean, in some of our meetings, the idea that there's another individual or entity that's, listening and taking notes and transcribing is very uncomfortable, since sometimes we have very sensitive conversations. And where I landed with that is AI sits in on some meetings, not every meeting. And it is helpful to have a bit of a transcription of the conversation and the action items, because AI can then summarize the meeting in a few bullet points and then also the action items. So if I've agreed to something or the other person or people have, it's helpful. And then it can aggregate those to-dos from the day's meetings. It's not always great at prioritizing, but it's great at, giving a summary of the to-dos. So that I do appreciate, because it helps me remain on point. However, I use my judgment as to when I want AI to transcribe and be there, because not all meetings feel appropriate for AI. Just like not all meetings are appropriate for having other members. Like if it's a development conversation or just like a really emotionally charged, sensitive one.
That's a good recommendation for HR leaders.
Yeah.
So here's another one. I know we didn't have this on our conversation pillar list that we're going to talk about, but let's go there because I wonder about this sometimes.
Yeah.
We know culture is important. We've focused on it for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
human to human.
Uh-huh.
Now that we're moving into agentic capabilities, that there are going to be AI team members that we work with. What do you think that means for culture? Do we need to program culture into the agents? Just like we do things to try and help support our people with culture? What's your take or some of your thinking around that when it comes to what does culture look like in terms of trying to help the agents understand that and then human AI interactions in the workplace?
Jason, this could be a whole other TED Talk.
Right?
So, yeah, great question, and very timely. With agentic AI, we are able to program and code certain cultural parts into the AI or the bot or the assistant, right? So certain terminology, vernacular words, acronyms, like things that we use, as well as the way that we engage and work with one another. Just like in Chat GPT, you can have it write something for you in, like in Old English, let's say, and it can, put something together. You can have it do a haiku, or you can give it stylized guidance. You can do the same with agentic AI. So those elements are there. I think in terms of culture, what we're going to see, my prediction is I think humans are still going to carry the torch when it comes to culture and when it comes to the evolution of culture, because humans are constantly going in and out of organizations as they start new jobs, as they leave jobs, as they're promoted, their jobs expand, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's going to continue to create a very rich tapestry of culture within organizations. I think agentic AI is going to assist the culture that we humans create, but I don't necessarily see a world that's AI first, where AI is driving the culture. That's my personal opinion, but yeah.
Again, one of those things we probably should keep to humans doing. As you were describing that, Gianna, I had a funny thought cross my mind. So could you imagine, like, we're all working with like different AI agents on a team and being like, I don't want to work on this project with Bob, the AI agent. His personality, it just rubs me the wrong way. I'd much rather work with Sally, the AI agent, on this. Can I work with Sally instead to collaborate on this project? It makes me wonder if, like, sometimes some of the human aspects of culture and knowing our strengths and just our affective piece of who we are, if as the agents themselves maybe start to have certain types of personality characteristics, right, that may come across as, each one a little bit more unique than the other. If there may be preferences in terms of humans being like, yeah, I'd rather work with this one than this one on this project.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the AI bots would ever have a preference for, I want to work with Jason on this project. I don't want to work with human, Jane on this. Or do you see that world's coming?
How funny would that be? I know this much. If you ask it, it'll probably give you an honest answer. It'll be like, I can't stand working with Jane. I'd much rather work with Sally.
Right.
Kind of thing. Like, because it's probably not going to hold back and be like, well, let me give you an appropriate, like, it's going to be like, nope, this is the one I'd prefer to work with, I think.
Yeah.
It's just funny to think about, like this stuff just blows my mind. Like, I know we're kind of, tongue in cheek having fun with it, but we're very close to this becoming a reality of there actually being AI agent employees that are team members that are in meetings with us. Eventually, maybe if for those who are working in physical workplaces still away from home, that it could be a robot body that's coming and sitting in like next to you in a conference room on a call. And I know we're kind of having some fun with it, but it is a very real reality that's coming like within this decade. We can pretty safely say it's going to happen before 2030.
Yeah. Did you ever see that show from back in the day? I think in the 50s. I wasn't alive then, thankfully, but back in the 50s, or maybe it was the 60s. And then they did a remake not that long ago that's called Lost in Space.
Yes.
There's a robot, and the robot is like Danger Will Rogers, and they're kind of like traveling to different places in outer space and stuff. As you were talking, that show and image came to my mind because the robot, right, that Will Rogers has is able to think. He's able to discern and sort of make judgment calls. He saves Will Rogers and his family and other people a number of different times and gets them out of all different sorts of calamities and whatnot. And I wonder if viewing AI and robots as more friends than foes is helpful, because the reality is we are living in a world that is very dynamic. It is continuing to evolve and change, and that pace of change is scary. That said, I think leaning into the discomfort a bit and leaning into our humanness is what's going to help us evolve and work with AI in really healthy ways.
That's so good. That's so true. In the way we talk to it, the way we prompt it, right?
Yeah.
Typically is going to influence the way that it responds to us.
Yeah.
There was a gentleman I had on for the last episode. His name's Vince Freeman. He's a chief AI implementation officer. I was like, well, that's cool. Yeah. Essentially what he does in a nutshell, Gianna, is He works across all the departments to help spin up agentic supports for that specific department. So there's an agent specific that works in the sales department with the sales team, someone that works with the marketing team, right? And I'll never forget one of the things he shared with me was one of the things we've learned in this process is that the leaders who are really effective communicators with humans are also very effective communicators with AI. The humans that struggle with communication effectively with their team are struggling with communicating effectively with the AI and getting the outputs from the AI that you're looking for. So what he was saying is communication is everything, not just with human to human as we've always been accustomed to, but as we start to do more with AI and have AI team members, that you have to communicate with clarity and precision and with like certain affective type of words in order to get a certain type of quality of response, both informationally, being accurate, but also the tone of the answer that you get as well.
Right.
And when he was
It's
sharing that, it
about
was a good
feedback.
reminder to your point of like, we can't just view them as a thing.
Mm-hmm.
We do need to kind of see them truly as a teammate and that they deserve the same respect as we would speak with other teammates if we want to still get uh, production, a good, healthy culture, and those types of things. We got to start thinking about them that way, right?
Yes. And I think this is also where back to critical thinking being something that is very important for us to focus on and make sure that we are training our employees in how to continue to do. We don't want our brains to atrophy. We want to make sure that we're training folks in critical thinking skills. I would add to that, yes, communication skills, feedback, transparent, authentic communication, right? I think all of that is important because in a world where AI bots and agents are working with us, it is important that we are communicating with them effectively, for sure.
Well, we've talked a lot about AI. We went pretty deep, didn't we?
We did. We did.
So let's move from 2 letters. Let's move on to another big topic, but it's 3 letters, and I think this one's probably going to take most of the rest of our time. But you have a lot of expertise in this, and given what's going on, I think we should have a conversation around DEI.
Yes.
It is a lightning rod issue politically right now. There's a tremendous amount of vitriol, of confusion, a lot of market reaction, decisions that are being made pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk through that a little bit to help leaders understand it and think critically about it. So just to kind of kick things off as we head this direction, just some initial thoughts from you on what's going on with DEI right now.
Mm. Yeah, well, so Jason, this is an emotionally charged topic for me. I will just preface and say as we start to have this part of our conversation because, as someone who is Filipina, female, and who has grown up and had to work in a world where I was the underrepresented minority in the room, um, I think that the increased awareness of diversity, inclusivity has been something that has felt really empowering for me because it's created space where I think voices like mine were sometimes not welcome, not included, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so to see the overt dismantling of DEI or DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, is hard and it's painful. But where I have hope is I observe and witness that in organizations where DEI is being overtly dismantled, I see at the same time a commitment to continuing inclusive, belonging types of behaviors and initiatives in organizations. And I think what's happening, and I tend to be an optimist, I will say, but I think what's happening in many organizations is because these are becoming increasingly polarizing, triggering words, we're seeing companies no longer use those words, but using instead words like inclusivity or words that are getting to perhaps the heart of some of the DEI initiatives, but using different words. And I will say, I, as an individual who is passionate about DEI, I'm not attached to the words. Frankly, call it whatever you want. What I care most about is that we're creating environments where people from all different backgrounds and walks of life and beliefs and orientations are welcome, wanted, included, and valued. Again, call it whatever you want. But what I think is important is that we are mindful to ensure that we are still creating inclusive spaces.
That's a good reminder, because if we aren't going to focus on those things, right, which there's been a big push to try and dismantle those things and do away with them in business,
Yeah.
then I think what that's going to end up with is a lot more of the people inside the organization almost have to do those things. And I think this is what you're talking about is, okay, if we're not going to have an official policy on it at company X, we can still do those things. Those of us that are teammates here, we can still put a lot of DEI type practice type things of focus of how we view each other, of how we shape our culture, of how we show up for one another, of how we collaborate with each other, of making sure that all voices are heard, that there's opportunities to respond in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really positive thing. Of there's been a lot of negativity of what's happened, and I totally get it. But I think there's still positive ways that maybe what this does is this triggers a little bit more empowerment of everyone else in the organization, instead of looking to leadership for there to be a policy to say we have to do things this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That maybe that pendulum starts to swing that other direction of it being a little bit more quote unquote grassroots.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And an example of that might be an organization that has dismantled some of its DEI mission statements and overarching programs around DEI, whether it's in hiring practices or whatever. But what I've observed is typically they're not dismantling their ERGs, their employee resource groups. And so what once was a centralized diversity initiative statement, whatever, now there's an opportunity for ERG leaders to fill that void and to say, okay, we as an organization might not be reporting globally on our diversity metrics, but we, the Latinx ERG, or we, the Black focus ERG, or, the Asian focus ERG, or veterans ERG, we are going to take that as an opportunity for us to really do our diligence, gather the facts and data, and highlight this information for leaders as well as employees as well as candidates. So I think that just because the global central, DEI might be evolving, I think there's still an opportunity and space for others to fill that void and to do it differently, right? Because again, nothing is forever. So let's do it better.
That's so good. I hadn't thought about ERGs. That's where a lot of DEI type stuff can still be done really well, is through ERGs, grassroots, through the employees, without expecting it to be led from leadership all the way at the very top.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have some recommendations? So we may have some folks that maybe this is the first time they're hearing about ERGs because maybe they haven't had them in their company before. Can you walk us through what is an employee resource group a little bit, and maybe how that steps into supporting DEI, even if the company at the top level is saying we're doing away with DEI policy? Can you walk us through maybe what that looks like?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so an ERG, like employee resource group, can also in some companies be called an affinity group or like employee circles. They can come by different names, but ERG is sort of the most common one. And it's typically a group of individuals who have a common bond, that are passionate and want to help educate people about that specific item the ERG is centered around. And I'll give you some examples in a minute. And ERGs are often also welcoming of what are called allies. So people who might not necessarily identify as whatever that ERG is, about, but they're friends of. And so as an example, many organizations who have no ERG existing today may start to have a female-focused ERG. I've seen this in several different organizations where the first ERG out the gate is one that's focused on women. And usually it's a small group of women who get together and write a charter and mission statement and have some roles and responsibilities and literally create a group. Think of it as a club, like in back, the high school and college days. And usually there's a little bit of funding that the HR leader will give because it's around like culture and engagement. And then there's a calendar of, okay, like, why do we exist? Do we exist to educate, to celebrate, right? And to sort of create these forums for healthy conversation. And then they're off to the races. And so a lot of times the most flourishing ERGs, again, are the ones where allies are also there and supportive. I've worked in companies where we had our women's focused ERG throw really big celebrations and events for Women's Day and all of these different kind of female focused days. And over half of the population attending were men because they were allies and they were strong feminists and, supportive of it. And that's wonderful because women's issues shouldn't be just something that women support. For women's issues to be something that gets the time of day and that we make progress on, men need to also understand and uphold these. And then there are ERGs that are focused on ethnic groups. There could be ERGs that are focused on neurodiversity, on veterans. So there are any number of different types of ERGs. And essentially, again, it's a group of employees who are passionate and identify with insert whatever that is, who start to then create programs and education for the employees around that. And they're just such a wonderful source of culture, connectivity, and belonging in organizations.
I love that. And helps people feel like they've got like, like, hey, I know we're all a team, but I got like my core people too here around this particular type of issue or this similarity, maybe to the life that I'm living kind of thing. I'll tell you what, one I would sign up for in a heartbeat is parents of young kids. I
Yeah.
need all the wisdom from parents with young kids. My wife and I, we got these 4 sons that are under the age of 11. It is just mad chaos at our place all the time.
Wow. I
It
can
is.
only I can only imagine. But yeah, like, I think these ERGs provide a sense of community. And when people can gather in community and feel included and like they belong, this goes back to what we talked about earlier, where I think this starts to build trust and create hope. We're going full circle, Jason.
We are. You brought up another big word, and maybe this is kind of as we start to get toward the back end of the show here. Let's dig in on this because you just unwrapped a really big one that we're actually tackling at People Forward Network right now too. So that's why this is really interesting to me. You mentioned the word community.
Mm.
We're seeing a big shakeup right now with social media platforms. Again, we're going first full circle, like he said. We're coming all the way back. We were talking about social media at the beginning, how it's leading to people not having hope. Social media is losing a lot of users, consistent daily active users, including LinkedIn, because now LinkedIn is trying to be like Instagram, that it's now becoming the place for like the big time influencer people that are like, look at me, I've got all the right answers. LinkedIn used to be a platform for finding and building authentic relationships with people. It felt like a community. It feels like a zoo now, just like a lot of the other social media platforms where it's being filled with a whole bunch of people that are in it for the vanity metrics, that are trying to be influencer level type stuff, and less about developing, cultivating real relationships with people that maybe are dealing with the same types of stuff that you are, that you want to grow with, that you want to share learnings back and forth with each other. And here's what we have found, Gianna, is going through that journey, we heard from so many people first leaders that were telling us at People Forward Network, we wish that there was like a place we could go. Because LinkedIn used to be that place where we could do it, but now my DMs get slammed all the time of someone wanting to connect with me, and they're just trying to pitch me and sell me on something. So part of the journey for us is we've launched a community at the start of this year, and you're a member of it. You're one of our founding members. But we really are starting to see at a macro level, people are looking for community. They want to be part of certain niche type of communities that are very specific to topics or values or things that are really important to them, similar to the ERGs you were talking about, and get away from a lot of the noise that's on the social media platforms. So it's almost like what the social media platforms were supposed to be for us a lot of these niche communities are starting to become for us. And I'm wondering if the ERG piece, maybe those things spin off into eventually being like little micro communities within companies. What do you think about that?
Well, I think in a lot of organizations, ERGs have their own communities, whether it's their own Slack channels or their own pages on the intranets and organizations, their own way of connecting with that population who is a member of the ERG. So I agree with you. I think because we're bombarded by so much information and pings and dings and slacks and IMs and all this other stuff constantly, it makes it really hard to sift through a lot of the noise to find the real nuggets. And so having these smaller, more curated communities, I think, is where we're able to feel that sense of connection and its depth of connection. It's not just a superficial quantity, but it really is, I think, about quality of connection. And I agree with you. On LinkedIn, sometimes I take a deep breath when I'm going to dive into messages on LinkedIn because the majority of them are people trying to pitch or sell me something. Or I can tell that it's an AI bot that has written a, poorly worded and phrased in-mail or, outreach or
That's right.
whatever. And then what I find is sometimes I think I miss important messages on LinkedIn just because those are like the real nuggets, but they're lost in all of the kerfuffle and noise of everything else. So having smaller curated groups, I think, is where we're headed. And the pendulum swings back and forth. And I think we're moving into a world where we're still going to have, things like LinkedIn and places that are, like massive, folks and followers and blah, blah, blah. But I think we're starting to see more and more of like the People Forward Network communities and cohorts and circles that are evolving because you're able to have just a depth of connection there that the LinkedIns of the world just don't provide.
That's right. And you know and trust the people that are in there, right? That it's vetted, that it's not like, hey, as soon as I join this, I'm going to have like 10 vendors trying to sell me on something, sliding into my DMs, like we know each other already, to your point.
Something I was thinking about the other day with some of these circles and smaller curated communities is it's interesting to me the depth of relationship you can build in a remote environment, right? Because I'm going to a conference next week in Vegas that I'm very excited about, and I'll be meeting with people. Frankly, some of the folks I've never met in person before, yet I have these like really deep relationships
Yeah,
with. And so I was thinking and reflecting to myself that I wonder if the next phase and evolution of what we're talking about is to have a bit of a hybrid approach where these circles and communities, these curated groups meet as they do in the forums and the online spaces. And also there are these opportunities to connect in real life as humans, because that only deepens the connection. And then we go back to being, like remote, and whether it's Zoom calls or, G chats or, whatever. But I think that that's where the world is evolving, because in a world with so much AI and technology and every other thing, we're craving connection. We want to connect with other human beings. There's a loneliness pandemic happening in the US right now. And I think that, to the extent that we can connect in person, I think it's not going to solve everything, but I think it's going to address that a lot because it fulfills that need to really vibe on a different level.
it does. I mean, there's no replacement. But to your point, though, when you're talking about that, I think back, like, there's so many good relationships that I have that continue, where I check in with people each month, literally never met the person in person because they're in some different part of the country, but we build it over time through these types of meetings, these types of interactions that we're doing virtually.
Totally.
And so it's just cool to think like eventually one day, at some point, it'll be
Yeah.
actually get to meet them in person.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's wild when you think about that. And I bet a lot of leaders that are listening to this conversation today, there's probably a lot that they think of that way too. Like, you know what? Oh my gosh, I didn't realize it and think about it, but I haven't met that person in person yet. And it's someone that I trust, someone that I've gotten some good information from of solving certain challenges. Someone that maybe sent somebody my way that was either someone that was good that we brought on our team or eventually ended up being a client,
Mm-hmm.
but that you never met him in person before. So that hybrid type of concept you just brought up is really interesting, of like these micro communities, but then being able to meet up in person throughout the year too.
Yeah, it only strengthens that. And I think that coming out of the pandemic really showed us this, right? Like I remember, hiring a ton of different people during the pandemic. And then when we were finally able to meet, it was like, oh my gosh, like it was just this
Yeah.
amazing, wonderful thing. And then we were able to almost take the afterglow and glitter and stardust from those in-person meetings, and that helped fuel and deepen the connection that we then took online again.
That's so good. We've covered a lot. We talked life work integration. We've talked artificial intelligence. We've talked DEI. We're talking about the future of ERGs and communities to help pick up with some of the things that have gone away with DEI at the top level for some companies. So as we get ready to wrap up, Gianna, we have covered a lot, but I want to give you some space and some time here as you talk to our listeners. What are some of your closing thoughts that you want to leave with them?
We are living in a time where there's a lot of change. On that note, I don't know that humans have ever lived in a time where they said there's not much change happening. So let's just kind of keep it all into perspective. Change is the only constant. Humans all want transformation, but few people embrace change. To have transformation, to continue to evolve, we have to embrace change. And so what I would say to listeners is be courageous. Be okay trying different things, sometimes failing, but then iterating. And that could be with AI, that could be with various, learning tools, that could be with your DEI programs and, what you're doing there, that could be with different initiatives with all the generations in the workforce. Don't be afraid to try things. Communicate authentically with your employees about what you're doing and what you're trying to solve. And if something works, wonderful. Scale it, grow it, continue to invest in it. And if something isn't as successful as you'd like it to be, that's okay too. Morph it, shift it, or discontinue it. That's a perfectly acceptable outcome. But make sure that you're communicating very authentically. That builds trust. And I think if we as leaders are being clear about our North Stars and where we're going and how we're going to get there, I think that will create the hope that you spoke about earlier.
I love that you brought it back to hope. That is what it's about. That's what folks are looking for. And you brought us some hope today. And you brought some hope to a lot of leaders out there about where the future is headed, that we are headed to a great place. But it does require change. We're going to have to use some different muscles. We're going to have to think critically about what are the things we want to give to AI, what are the things we're going to keep for us to do, so that we don't atrophy some of those parts of our brain.
And
but we are very resilient.
Yes, we as humans are resilient. We are in it together. So let's learn from each other. Let's share information freely about our successes, wins, what's working, and also the things that didn't work, because that's what's going to ensure our continued success as a species.
No doubt about it. And so, folks, you need to continue learning from Gianna. So let's talk about that, Gianna. What is the best way for people to stay in the know with things that you're doing, your content that you're putting out there, where they can continue to learn from you? What's the best way for them to stay connected with you?
It's probably LinkedIn. I know we talked about that, and I'm chuckling on the inside and maybe a little bit on the outside because I don't have a bazillion and one different social media accounts. And so LinkedIn is about all I can really manage and muster. And so I don't have a Twitter or X account. There's a lot that I don't have. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me.
And that's the same for me too. I did all that talk about, we're moving to something different. I'm like, still connect with me on LinkedIn. Everybody.
Yeah. Because that's a starting place for then a lot of conversations and connection and relationship, right? And so what I've learned is to use LinkedIn in that way and to really do my best to, not succumb and listen to all of the noise and the crazy and all the sales pitches and things like that on there.
I love it. It makes sense. So connect with Gianna Driver on LinkedIn. To continue the conversation, see the content that she's putting out there. As a chief people officer and advisor and board member, she is a strategic HR genius. So if you're looking for a lot of the answers, not only that you heard today, but so much more, continue to watch and see a lot of the content she's putting out there to help leaders move that direction in the future of work. Gianna, thank you for being on with us today. and giving us a lot of insightful wisdom and a little bit more info into who you are.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jason. This was fun.
Awesome. We'll catch you next time, Gianna. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Working Forward. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Until next time, here's to building tomorrow today.